In today's episode of The World in a Bone, I'll be discussing various body modifications from different cultures around the world. When a person first thinks of the phrase body modification, they often think of tattoos and piercings. They're not wrong, but there's also more fascinating modifications that actually change a person's bones. Just as languages change around the world, so does the concept of beauty and the pain willing to be tolerated for the desired look. The first body modification I will discuss is something we all know and love: braces. The practice of wearing braces to straighten teeth has moved from the West and taken the world by storm. Everyone wants to attain the beautiful aesthetic of perfectly aligned teeth, even if it'll leave them in pain and misery for a few years. For braces to correctly modify our teeth, 3 important things are necessary: brackets, arch wire, and elastics. Brackets are a small piece of metal bonded to each tooth with a special glue. They act as the building blocks for moving teeth because it's where the pressure of modification will actually grab to move. Arch wire is a thin piece of metal that is bent and placed into the slots of the brackets and creates the pressure that moves the brackets and teeth. Different types of wires are used throughout treatment to produce different shapes and pressure to correctly align a person's teeth. Elastics are rubber bands that hook onto a maxillary and mandibular bracket, increasing pressure in one direction for better movement. The actual process of modifying teeth involves the biomechanical response called remodeling. Bone is a living tissue and responds to environmental stimuli to change. Constant pressure from braces on teeth specifically affect the periodontal membrane around the root of the teeth, as well as the alveolar membrane where the roots of teeth are attached. Osteoblasts and osteoclasts are the biomechanical workers that create change according to the stimuli they experience. Osteoclasts resorb bone in the direction force is applied by the braces, allowing the teeth to actually move in their desired direction. Osteoblasts work in the opposite direction of the force, laying down new bone to fill in the gap as teeth move to their new destination. Overall, braces can straighten virtually any kind of crooked teeth or misaligned teeth thanks to their use of constant light pressure that cues continuous bone remodeling. The next body modification I will discuss is the old Chinese practice of foot binding. In ancient China, foot binding was already practiced by some groups of people, but became especially prevalent in the Song dynasty. At this time, an emperor showed the most favor towards a concubine who had danced on bound feet, leading others to practice foot binding to also gain the emperor's favor. The practice eventually spread throughout the whole country and became a beauty norm, particularly among the elite Han women. Bound feet left women unable to walk easily, but elite women who had servants did not need to worry about this impediment. Small feet came to symbolize elegance, model virtue, and modesty, and later eventually forced women to go through a painful practice in order to attain favorable marriage proposals. Many looked down on the practice, seeing how much pain it caused women, and foot binding was eventually outlawed in China in the early 20th century. As the name of the practice implies, process for foot binding was a very painful experience. Women would first soak their feet in a bath of herb oils and animal blood to soften their extremities. Then, the last 4 toes, including MT2 through 5 and pedal phalanges of rays 2 through 5, were curled with great force and bound with cloth, pressing the toes underneath the sole. For several days to 2 months, the feet are bound tighter and tighter to get the feet used to the binding. Eventually, the toes of pedal rays 2 through 5 and the tarsals that create the arch of the foot are broken. The feet are bound again in this broken state to heal and create 10-centimeter feet, or roughly 4 inches. As we can see in the X-ray, the joints between the tarsals are broken and left to heal in a different manner. Only the talus remains in its original position, articulated to the tibia and fibula. However, it no longer sits on the dorsal surface of the calcaneus, but the distal portion, resulting in the calcaneus becoming lateral in the foot with the calcaneal tuberosity taking more force from the weight of the body. It can also be seen that pedal rays 2 through 5 are tucked underneath the hallux. This means rather than the hallux taking on the pressure of walking, as the big toe is supposed to, the curled pedal rays 2 through 5 do instead. With the force of the whole body being localized to the proximal tip of the calcaneus and the dorsal surface of the pedal phalanges and metatarsals, walking becomes a difficult task. It was not uncommon for toes to be lost or for one to have gangrene in their bound foot. Another body modification is the practice of wearing neck rings among the Kayan Lawi women of Myanmar. There are various stories and myths that illustrate the beginning of the practice. One story states the neck rings were worn to protect the villagers from tiger attacks because tigers often go for the throat to make a kill. Another said the rings were worn to make the women of the village less attractive to men of neighboring tribes so they would not be kidnapped. If this were the case, it had the opposite effect because it gave women an elegant, beautiful appearance that is still associated with beauty today. The neck rings are not only a symbol of high status, but for some, it's also a marker of faithfulness to their husband. The neck rings are not actually individual rings, but rather coils of brass and gold alloy. As the neck is elongated, the coil is swapped with a longer one and can eventually weigh up to 20 pounds. The practice begins with girls as young as 5 years old because a child's skeleton is still growing and is more pliable to modifications. Though the neck rings are beautiful, there are some lifestyle setbacks. These women can no longer lean their heads back, so they must drink from straws. The neck elongation has an impact on the vocal cords, resulting in a deeper and hollow-sounding voice. The metal of the rings can also get hot and cause chafing, requiring the women to wear natural ointments or cloth to protect the skin. Contrary to popular beliefs, the neck rings do not actually make the neck longer. Rather, the neck rings push the clavicles and compress the rib cage downwards to give the illusion of an elongated neck. Some separation between the cervical vertebrae of the neck does occur, but it is minimal. Drastic changes to the cervical vertebrae could cause paralysis or even death. The only actual changes within the neck itself are weakened muscles due to disuse. However, the clavicles and upper rib cage are greatly modified. As we can see in the X-ray, the clavicles and ribs 1 and 2 have been pushed lower by the pressure from the neck rings. Where the clavicle once had a characteristic anterior curve, it has now flattened. As the clavicles moved down, ribs 1 and 2 were also compressed to provide more space for the neck rings. I could not find other X-rays that provided a different view of the trunk, but I can surmise that the heavily compressed upper ribs of the rib cage would have a distinct V shape from a lateral view. This is because all of the ribs are still articulating with the thoracic vertebrae and the sternum, which means only the body of the rib can easily remodel to facilitate the neck rings. This way, with the two articulations intact, the body of the rib would have bent down into a V shape. Even though the cervical and upper ribs of the rib cage have been compressed and the muscles of the neck have weakened, the Kayan Lawi women can live if they take their rings off. Due to the cervical vertebrae having no serious change, the head would be held up just fine. Caution must be taken when the coils are removed and in the early stages of removal due to weak neck muscles. Though they can live without them, most women never do because they often say the rings have become a part of them. The last body modification I will discuss is the practice of head elongation by the historical Calagua people 700 years ago in present-day Colca Valley, Peru. Chemical analysis of remains found in this region indicated elongated heads most likely distinguished the upper class of Calagua. It was found that women with elongated skulls were more likely to have a broader diet and fewer injuries from physical attacks than those without the modifications. This means these women had access to a variety of food and were well cared for. When skulls of such caliber are seen for the first time, people often claim they belong to aliens. However, they are simply modified human skulls. The practice was banned by the invading Spanish in the 16th century and was forgotten in the region. In order to attain the shape, the Calagua people had tied pieces of wood tightly around the head of infants. As infants do not have fused sutures in their skull, their head can easily take on the new elongated shape. This produced very characteristic tall and thin skulls. From the picture, we can see the only bones that are affected by the elongation is the neurocranium. The facial bones of the viscerocranium are ultimately unchanged. In the neurocranium, the frontal, parietals, temporals, sphenoid, and occipital have all been stretched posteriorly. The parietals have been stretched the longest and produce the significant dome at the top of the head. The frontal and occipital have become very flat and elongated, and among different skulls, there is variation in how much the frontal and occipital contribute to the dome shape. In some, the upper dome is made entirely by the parietals, while in others, the frontal and occipital extend much higher and provide structure. The temporals and sphenoid have the least amount of change in the neurocranium because they were only slightly posteriorly elongated. As the skull changed shape, the soft tissue of the brain also had to change accordingly. However, the change in brain shape did not have an impact on brain function. This is because as long as the volume of the brain is not altered, the functioning of the brain will remain the same due to its plastic nature. Sadly, there is not much research about the brain function of these elongated heads because soft tissue is not preserved after desiccation. I hope you all enjoyed watching today's episode of The World in a Bone. As we all know, so much information can be locked within the smallest fragment of a bone. All we have to do is know how to read it, and we'll learn fascinating things about people everywhere. Thanks for watching!